She was paid $20 to ruin a blind date, but the Millionaire CEO fell for her instead. It all started with a single crumpled bill, $20. That's all it took to set a chain of events in motion that no one could have imagined. On a cool Saturday night in Dallas, the city buzzed with neon lights and the hum of weekend chatter. Inside a small corner diner called the Copper Spoon, a waitress named Maggie Porter was finishing up her shift. Maggie was sharp-witted with a habit of masking her exhaustion behind sarcasm. Life hadn't been kind. Her paychecks barely stretched far enough to cover rent on her tiny apartment, but she carried herself with humor that made customers love her. That's when her best friend Rachel stormed into the diner, flustered and desperate. She slapped a wrinkled $20 bill onto the counter like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Maggie, please. You've got to help me. My parents are forcing me on this blind date tonight, and the guy's some golden boy from a rich family. If I show up alone, I'll never hear the end of it. I just need you to ruin it. Make him hate me." Maggie arched an eyebrow. $20, Rachel. That barely covers my emotional damages for hanging out with you. Rachel clasped her hands dramatically. "Come on, it's only for an hour? Say something embarrassing, make me look terrible. Just make sure he never calls me again." Against her better judgment, Maggie sighed, grabbed the bill, and slipped the cash into her apron pocket. "Fine. But if I scare him off before appetizers, you're buying me pie for a week." Minutes later, Maggie followed Rachel into the restaurant's private dining room. That's when she saw him, Daniel Hayes. Tall, effortlessly composed, wearing a charcoal gray suit that looked like it had been sewn right onto him. His watch glimmered under the light, understated yet worth more than Maggie's car. And those eyes, steady calm and unsettlingly curious. Rachel sat nervously at the table, forcing a smile. Maggie slid in beside her, pretending to take an order. She leaned forward and said just loud enough for Daniel to hear Rachel's snores like a chainsaw. "Last week, the neighbor thought someone was power sawing through the walls." Rachel nearly choked on her water. Daniel tilted his head, intrigued. "Really? Oh, and she talks in her sleep, too." One night she shouted, "Give me back my donut" at 3 a.m. Whole apartment thought a robbery was happening at Dunkin'. Rachel gasped, "Maggie." But Daniel laughed, not a forced polite chuckle. A genuine laugh that lit up his face. The more Maggie threw embarrassing stories, the more his attention stayed fixed on her, not Rachel. His eyes didn't wander not once. Rachel slumped in her seat, defeated. Maggie's plan was working, or so she thought. What she didn't realize was that she hadn't scared Daniel away at all. She had just made herself unforgettable. And as Daniel's quiet laughter faded into a thoughtful smile, Maggie had no idea that her life had just shifted forever, all because of a wrinkled $20 bill. The next morning, sunlight spilled over downtown Dallas, bouncing off the glass towers and into the sleepy streets below. Maggie trudged into the Copper Spoon, still half asleep hair, pulled into a messy knot, muttering to herself about coffee. She tied on her apron, ready for another ordinary Sunday shift. Families with fussy kids, retired couples debating over toast, and businessmen who ordered food they never finished. But when she glanced at table 7, her heart nearly stopped. There he was, Daniel Hayes, the same man from the blind date. Maggie froze tray in hand, whispering, "You have got to be kidding me." Daniel sat alone, no suit jacket this time, just a crisp light blue shirt. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, though there was still the air of quiet confidence about him. And when his gaze landed on Maggie, a sly smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Maggie marched over, pen tapping against her notepad like a gavel. "What are you doing here?" He leaned back unfazed. "Having lunch? Isn't this a restaurant? You ran out of here last night like you'd seen a ghost. I figured I'd traumatized you forever." Daniel chuckled softly. "Actually, I left curious." "Curious," she repeated, folding her arms. "Curious about you." Maggie blinked, caught off guard. Men usually complained about her sarcasm, not came back for more. She tried to recover. "Well, if you're brave enough to try our Sunday special, it's chaos seasoned with irony. Chef's signature." Daniel laughed again. This time a real laugh, warm and unguarded. "Then that's exactly what I'll have." As Maggie scribbled on her pad, she noticed something unusual. Daniel wasn't acting like a typical high-roller customer, nitpicking details or flashing money to prove a point. He listened, really listened. His gaze followed her every word, not in a predatory way, but with genuine interest. Back in the kitchen, Maggie's coworker Marcus nudged her. "Guy at table 7's been watching you since he sat down." "Who is he?" "Sort of a mistake I made last night," she muttered. When she returned with his food, Daniel leaned in slightly. "You know, most people would have apologized after the stories you told, but you doubled down." Maggie smirked. "Apologies are boring. Embarrassing people is an art form." Daniel's eyes lit up. Impressive art, actually. Maggie nearly dropped the plate. "You thought that was impressive? Most people are boring. You're not." The words caught her off guard. Compliments weren't something she was used to. Not like that. She quickly set his meal down to cover the sudden heat in her cheeks. When the bill came, Daniel placed 2 crisp 50s on the table, along with a card embossed in gold letters, Daniel Hayes, CEO, Hayes Industries. Maggie's jaw dropped. A CEO, a millionaire. The man she had called Rachel's chainsaw-snoring disaster date was one of the most powerful names in the city. And yet, as he walked out calm and confident, Daniel's eyes lingered on her, one last time. Maggie gripped the card, whispering to herself, "Oh no, I'm in big trouble." By Tuesday evening, Maggie thought the whirlwind had passed. Surely a man like Daniel Hayes had better things to do than chase after a sarcastic waitress from a small Dallas diner. But when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, she answered reluctantly, half expecting a debt collector. "Hello, Maggie, it's Daniel." The glass she was drying nearly slipped from her hands. "Daniel, how did you even get this number?" "I asked your manager, told him it was urgent." Her chest tightened. "Are you calling to sue me? Because listen, I didn't know you were—" "Maggie, relax," he interrupted, his voice calm and almost amused. "I'm not suing you. I'm inviting you out. Not dinner. Just show me your Dallas. Away from boardrooms and 5-star restaurants." Maggie pressed the phone tighter to her ear, heart racing. A millionaire CEO was asking her for a night out. Every instinct screamed that it was a bad idea. But curiosity, and something else she couldn't name, won. "Fine," she said finally, "but I picked the place." That's how they ended up at Clyde Warren Park the next evening. The sun dipped behind the skyscrapers as families picnicked, joggers passed by, and kids splashed near the fountains. Daniel looked different without his suit. Dark jeans, gray shirt, sneakers. Less CEO, more ordinary. "You came," he said with a genuine smile. "I said I would. I don't break promises." A breeze rustled the trees, carrying the scent of food trucks nearby. Maggie started leading him toward the fountains when fat raindrops splattered on Daniel's shoulders. Within minutes, the sky opened up in a full downpour. Crowds scattered for cover. "This is what I wanted to show you," Maggie shouted over the storm, laughing as her hair plastered to her face. Rain, Dallas weather, changes moods faster than a teenager. They sprinted down soaked sidewalks, shoes splashing through puddles. Every awning, every cafe entrance was already packed with drenched strangers. Finally, Maggie grabbed his hand. "Come on, my place is close." Her apartment was tiny, cluttered, and carried the faint smell of books and old coffee. Clothes lay in a heap on the chair, and her houseplant drooped on the sill, half dead. Maggie cringed as she shut the door. "Welcome to my palace. Decor's called functional chaos." But Daniel didn't look disgusted. He looked curious. "It's cozy. And it's you." She grabbed towels and returned to find him scanning her bookshelf. "You read a lot. When I can afford the used copies, everything from mysteries to cookbooks." She hesitated, then pulled out a worn recipe book. "This was my dad's. He ran a food truck when I was little. Said cooking was part art, part science, and a whole lot of love." Daniel flipped through the handwritten notes, eyes softening. "You ever think about starting your own place?" Maggie laughed without humor. "Dreams don't pay rent, Daniel." He studied her carefully. "Maybe not. But what if someone believed in yours?" The question lingered in the air, heavier than the storm still raging outside. Maggie wasn't sure what scared her more. The thunder shaking the windows, or the possibility that he actually meant it. The storm outside finally slowed to a steady drizzle, but the electricity inside Maggie's small apartment was impossible to ignore. Daniel sat at her cramped kitchen table, still flipping through her father's recipe book. Maggie busied herself with boiling pasta. her back turned, pretending she wasn't rattled by the way he was looking at her, like she was the most fascinating mystery he'd ever stumbled upon. When the food was ready, she placed a steaming bowl of tomato pasta between them. "Don't get your hopes up. This is a $5 meal at best." Daniel twirled a forkful, tasted, and closed his eyes. "This is incredible." Maggie rolled her eyes. "It's pasta, with sauce." "No," he said firmly, "this has soul." The words hit her harder than they should have. Nobody had ever talked about her cooking like that. For a moment, she let herself imagine it. Her own place, her own menu, people coming, not just to eat, but to feel at home. Then she quickly shoved the thought away. Dreams like that didn't belong to people like her. They ate, talked, and laughed until the rain stopped. Just as Maggie started to relax, the door burst open. Rachel stumbled in, clearly tipsy, holding her heels in one hand. "Maggie, you will not believe the night I just..." She froze mid-sentence, staring at Daniel. "Oh, my God, you're the guy from the date." Maggie jumped up. "Rachel, this isn't what it looks like." Rachel ignored her, staggering closer. "You're even hotter without the suit. Tell me, do you like Maggie? Because she's amazing, funny, brilliant, single, tragically single." Maggie turned crimson. "Rachel!" But Daniel only smiled politely, standing to leave. "It's fine. I should go anyway." He looked at Maggie, his voice gentle. "Thank you for dinner and for everything else." She followed him to the door, heart racing. For a second, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. "Good night, Maggie." And just like that, he was gone, leaving her standing in the doorway, forehead tingling, pulse hammering, knowing life would never feel ordinary again. The next few weeks were a blur of routine shifts at the Copper Spoon. Yet somehow Daniel kept appearing. He'd stop in for coffee, linger for hours, or simply walk her home, never pushing, always patient. His presence unsettled her, but not in a bad way. She just couldn't figure out his angle. One night after she'd finished her shift, Daniel was waiting outside. "Maggie," he said, voice low but certain, "I've been thinking about your father's recipes, about that dream you're too afraid to chase." She frowned. "What about it?" He took a step closer, eyes steady. "Let me help you make it real. Let me invest. Not because I pity you, because I believe in you." Her heart thundered. The words were everything she had once longed to hear, and yet they terrified her, because she knew that saying yes would change everything. Maggie didn't say yes that night. Instead, she lay awake in her small apartment, staring at her ceiling fan as it creaked above her. Daniel's words replayed in her mind like a record she couldn't turn off. "Let me help you make it real." By morning, her doubts were already on overdrive. She'd seen men with money throw it around for sport, always expecting something in return. She couldn't stomach the thought of being someone's charity case, or, worse, someone's project. But Rachel wouldn't let her hide behind excuses. "Maggie," she said firmly one night, tossing a faded flyer onto the kitchen table. It was from her dad's old food truck, Porter's Kitchen on Wheels. A younger Maggie smiled in the picture, sitting on the counter with flour dusted across her cheeks. "Your father started with nothing, and you inherited his gift. You're scared because it matters. But if you don't try, you'll never forgive yourself." That truth gnawed at Maggie. Finally, after weeks of hesitation, she called Daniel. Her voice was flat, but her eyes betrayed the hope flickering inside her. "Fine. I'll do it. But only if it's a partnership. No pity, no handouts." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Deal." What followed was 6 months of sweat chaos and more arguments than Maggie cared to count. Together they found a worn-down space in the Deep Ellum district. The walls were cracked, the kitchen outdated, and the floor smelled faintly of old grease. But where others saw ruin, Maggie saw possibility. She and Daniel worked side by side through endless days. Contractors came and went, blueprints changed weekly, and every unexpected cost nearly sent Maggie spiraling. There were nights she collapsed into a chair, head in her hands, convinced she had made a terrible mistake. And every time Daniel was there, "We'll figure it out," he'd say, steady and certain, one problem at a time. Maggie tested recipes late into the night, scribbling notes in her father's old cookbook, until the pages were smeared with sauce. Daniel surprisingly jumped in too. He burned more dishes than he saved, but he never quit trying. Somewhere between ruined soufflés and laughter over undercooked chicken, Maggie realized this wasn't just a business. It was a bond forming brick by brick. By autumn, the restaurant finally took shape. Warm terracotta walls, wooden tables rescued from thrift shops, and plants dangling from ceiling hooks. It wasn't perfect, but it was her. She named it Porter's Flame, a tribute to her father's legacy and the fire inside her that Daniel had insisted on fanning back to life. As opening night approached, Maggie felt her nerves coil like a spring. What if nobody shows? What if I fail? Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Then, we fail together. But I don't think failure's on the menu tonight. For the first time, she almost believed him. Opening night arrived with the kind of nervous energy that made Maggie feel like her skin was 2 sizes too small. The sign outside glowed proudly, Porter's Flame. Inside, candles flickered on every table, jazz hummed through the speakers, and her small staff stood anxiously in place. Rachel hovered near the bar, in a bright red dress, grinning like she was about to watch her best friend either soar or spectacularly crash. Maggie smoothed her apron and whispered to herself, "Just don't burn the place down." At 6 o'clock sharp, the first guests arrived, an older couple who looked pleasantly surprised by the rustic decor. Then came a group of young professionals, snapping photos of everything from the chalkboard menu to the hanging plants. By 7, the dining room buzzed with chatter. Maggie tried to stay calm, but chaos had its own plans. The sound system set to play soft jazz suddenly blasted EDM so loudly that forks rattled on plates. Rachel scrambled to turn it down, but managed to shut it off completely, leaving the room in awkward silence. Maggie clapped her hands and smiled nervously. Welcome to Porter's Flame, where even the music is cooked fresh and unpredictable. The room erupted in laughter, tension broken. But the kitchen wasn't laughing. The oven temperature was spiking wildly. Half the bread came out raw, the other half charred. Maggie improvised, turning undercooked soup into experimental gazpacho, and passing off over-seasoned pasta as a chef's bold reinterpretation. Then disaster struck. One of the college-aged servers, Tommy, tried to carry 4 plates at once. He tripped on nothing but his own shoelaces, and time slowed. The plates sailed into the air like doomed frisbees before crashing across 3 tables. Mushroom risotto splattered over dresses, suits, and even the floor. The crowd gasped. Maggie's stomach plunged. This was it. The end before it even began. But then a man at one of the splattered tables lifted a forkful from his lap and said, "Honestly, not bad." Laughter erupted. "Abstract culinary art," Maggie announced, bowing dramatically. The diners clapped phones out, recording the moment like it was performance theater. To Maggie's shock, the night steadied after that. Customers leaned into the chaos, swapping dishes, laughing at the unpredictability. What could have been a disaster turned into an evening of connection. Instead of polished perfection, people got something rare: authenticity. By 9, the dining room was alive with energy. Maggie stood at the kitchen pass, sweaty, exhausted, and trembling. Daniel appeared beside her, sleeves rolled up, eyes shining. "Look at them," he said, gesturing to the crowded room. "They're not here for perfect. They're here for you." Maggie looked out at the diners, laughing, sharing bites, snapping photos, enjoying not just the food, but the spirit of the night. For the first time, she saw it too. Porter's Flame wasn't just open. It was alive. For weeks after the chaotic but unforgettable opening, Porter's Flame gained a steady rhythm. Regulars returned, word of mouth spread, and online reviews praised the quirky atmosphere and Maggie's fearless menu. Every night she moved between tables with a tired but genuine smile, still half convinced it could all crumble at any moment. But not everyone was celebrating. Late one evening, Maggie noticed Daniel sitting at a corner table, his expression darker than she'd ever seen. He wasn't sipping wine or charming customers. He was staring at his phone, jaw tight. When she finally slipped into the seat across from him, he slid the phone toward her. On the screen was a message from his parents. "This has gone far enough. Choose her, and you lose everything." Maggie blinked, stunned. Everything. What do they mean by that? Daniel exhaled slowly, his voice heavy. "My parents don't approve. They see you as a waitress who trapped me in some fantasy. They're threatening to cut me off. My inheritance, my position at Hayes Industries, all of it. The words hit her like a punch. You can't be serious. I wish I weren't, Daniel said, his eyes steady but tired. They think I'm throwing away the family legacy. Maggie forced a laugh that came out more like a choke. Well, they're not wrong. You are throwing away a fortune for someone who burns soup half the time. Daniel reached for her hand. Maggie, listen to me. None of that matters. The company, the money, it's noise. This, he said. Squeezing her hand is what matters. Before Maggie could answer, the restaurant door opened. In walked Margaret and Robert Hayes, Daniel's parents. They didn't order food. They didn't sit. They simply stood in the doorway, commanding attention in tailored suits sharper than knives. The room fell silent. Daniel, his mother, said coldly, "A Hayes does not belong in a place like this. End this charade, or you're no longer our son." Gasps rippled through the diners. Maggie froze, heart pounding. Every pair of eyes in the restaurant swung toward them. She wanted to crawl under the floorboards. Daniel rose slowly, shoulders squared. "I'm not ending anything." His father's face darkened. "Then you'll learn what life is without our name, without our money, without our protection." The ultimatum hung in the air like a guillotine. They turned and walked out, leaving a trail of icy silence behind them. Maggie's chest tightened. She stared at Daniel, searching his face for regret. But he only looked at her with quiet defiance. "I've made my choice," he said softly. In that moment, Maggie understood the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just about love or business anymore. It was war between a billionaire family and a waitress who dared to dream. And she feared the battle had only just begun. The fallout came faster than Maggie could have imagined. Barely a week after Daniel's parents stormed out of Porter's flame, the first blow landed. It was a Friday night, the dining room full of laughter, when a middle-aged man in a tailored suit stood up abruptly, clutching his stomach. "This food," he groaned loudly, drawing every eye. "It's spoiled, I've been poisoned." Gasps filled the room. Maggie rushed forward. "Sir, please, let's talk about this calmly. Our food is fresh. I checked every ingredient myself this morning." But the man's voice rose dramatic and sharp. "I'll be calling my lawyer. This establishment is negligent." He stormed out, leaving stunned silence and a dozen worried whispers in his wake. Within an hour, 2 more tables canceled their meals and demanded refunds. The hum of excitement that had always filled the restaurant was replaced with uneasy murmurs. Maggie stood at the counter, stomach sinking, feeling the walls closing in. The next morning, her fears were confirmed. A lawyer's letter arrived at her door, a $500 lawsuit for food poisoning and negligence. She nearly dropped the envelope. This can't be real." Daniel hurried over when she called, scanning the paperwork with narrowed eyes. "It doesn't add up," he muttered. "You keep every receipt. Every supplier is certified. Maggie, this isn't an accident. It's a setup." Her throat tightened. "Are you saying your parents—" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Days turned into weeks, and the scandal spread. Local news picked it up. Trendy new restaurant, accused of poisoning patrons. Reservations dried up. Longtime supporters canceled bookings. Maggie spent sleepless nights on the kitchen floor, surrounded by invoices, trying to prove her innocence to a city that suddenly doubted her. Rachel found her one morning, slumped against the oven, clutching a mug of cold coffee. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she whispered. "I can't," Maggie murmured. 43 cancellations since Friday. If this continues, we'll be done in 2 weeks." Rachel crouched down, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Then fight. If they want to destroy you, don't just roll over. Prove them wrong." Maggie looked at her friend, exhaustion burning in her eyes, but something else sparking too: determination. That night, she gathered her staff. "We're not hiding," she said firmly. "We're going to host a tasting night, free, open to anyone who wants to see the truth. We'll show this city exactly what Porter's Flame is about." The room fell silent, then Marcus, her head chef, nodded. "If we go down swinging." Daniel, standing at the back, looked at Maggie with quiet pride. But behind his eyes lingered something darker, because he knew exactly who was pulling the strings. And if his parents thought a lawsuit would scare him into submission, they had underestimated just how far he was willing to go to protect her. The night of the tasting arrived, and Porter's Flame buzzed with an anxious kind of energy. The chalkboard outside read in bold letters, "A Night of Truth. Everyone welcome." Maggie stood in the center of the dining room, heart hammering against her ribs. She smoothed the front of her apron, forcing her voice steady. "Good evening. Some of you came because you've heard the rumors. Others came because you believe in us. Either way tonight, you'll see for yourself. No secrets, no shortcuts, just food made with love, honesty, and proof." Applause rippled through the crowd. Over 100 people had shown up, loyal customers, curious locals, even a few well-known food critics. Among them was Sarah Chen, a columnist for the Dallas Tribune, her notepad ready. Maggie knew every word Sarah wrote could make or break her. The first course went out, bruschetta made with organic tomatoes and basil. Maggie had grown herself in the tiny garden behind the restaurant. Holding up a folder of certificates, she explained, "Every ingredient is documented. Every source is certified. If you doubt me, the paperwork is yours to inspect." Guests leaned in, murmuring their approval. Even Sarah jotted something with an intrigued smile. The second course, wild mushroom risotto, came with a surprise guest. Mr. Williams, a gray-bearded farmer Maggie had bought from for years. He stepped forward shyly as Maggie introduced him. "These mushrooms were harvested just 40 miles from here. This man has fed our city longer than I've been alive." The room applauded as he gave a small wave. Course by course, Maggie turned the night into more than a meal. It became a story. She shared her father's recipes, her mistakes in the kitchen, even her fears. By the time dessert arrived, her father's recipe for spiced apple cake, the room was alive with warmth and laughter, not suspicion. Midway through, Marcus whispered urgently, "There's a health inspector here. He wants to check the kitchen." Maggie's heart stuttered, but then she smiled. Perfect. Let him in. The inspector walked through every corner of the kitchen, clipboard in hand, followed closely by half the diners who wanted to witness it themselves. He checked temperatures, hygiene, storage. When he finally straightened, he cleared his throat. "Outstanding," he announced. "No violations." The crowd burst into applause. Maggie's throat tightened, but she held back tears. By the end of the night, guests didn't just eat. They bought vouchers for future visits, took photos, and flooded social media with posts, "Truth at Porter's Flame, Authentic Dallas." As the last plates were cleared, Sarah Chen approached Maggie. "Miss Porter," she said softly, "this was one of the most impressive demonstrations of integrity I've ever seen. Expect my review Sunday morning." When the doors finally shut, Maggie slumped against the counter, exhausted but lighter than she'd felt in weeks. For the first time since the nightmare began, she could breathe. She thought maybe the storm was over. But Daniel knew better. His phone buzzed that night with a message that made his stomach sink. "The fight isn't over. You've chosen her. Now you'll pay." The tasting night had been a triumph, but victories in Maggie's world never seemed to last. A week later, when she opened the restaurant mail, her hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the envelope. Inside was a second summons. This time for $2 million, accusing Porter's Flame of deceptive business practices. Maggie stared at the papers in disbelief. $2 million. We just proved our innocence. Rachel grabbed the envelope, skimming it quickly. "This isn't about food anymore. Someone wants to destroy you." That night, Daniel showed up at Maggie's apartment carrying 2 suitcases. His expression was stripped of its usual calm confidence. He looked raw, almost broken. "What happened?" Maggie whispered. He set the bags down. "I've been fired, or officially removed as CEO. My inheritance gone, the company gone, everything. But I made my choice, Maggie. I chose you." Her chest tightened. He had given up everything for her, and she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to carry the weight of that sacrifice. "Daniel, you don't understand. They won't stop. They've already hit us again. $2 million this time." He took the papers from her trembling hands, scanned them, then lifted his gaze. "Then we fight together." Weeks blurred into months. Daniel traded corner offices and boardrooms for onion chopping and dishwashing, working side by side with Maggie until his hands blistered and his feet ached. He learned the rhythm of prep work, the timing of the line, the joy of serving someone, a plate he'd helped create. "Are you happy?" Maggie asked him one quiet morning, watching him dice onions like a man on a mission. He paused, knife in hand. "I'm exhausted. I make in a month what I used to make in a day. My hands are covered in cuts." Her heart sank, afraid of what he'd say next. Then he smiled, "And I've never been more fulfilled in my life." Maggie couldn't hold back the tears that time. It was during those long months that investors began to notice Porter's flame. The tasting night combined with glowing press had made the restaurant a symbol of resilience. Small business owners reached out eager to back an expansion. One evening, Daniel found her staring at the numbers on a laptop. "They want to open a second location," she whispered, "in West Dallas. They're offering to fund it if we take on the risk together." Daniel squeezed her hand. "We've survived lawsuit Sabotage and your overcooked risotto. We can handle this too." But that night, as she lay awake, Maggie's doubts gnawed at her. He had given up an empire, his family, his name, for her. And she couldn't stop wondering, what if one day he realized he had made the wrong choice? The second location of Porter's Flame opened nearly a year after the lawsuits had first shaken them to the core. It stood proudly in Dallas's West End, a renovated brick building with tall windows and the same rustic warmth as the original. This time, Maggie refused to let fear dominate her. The menu had been expanded, the decor a little sharper, the staff trained to carry the restaurant's reputation into new territory. On opening night, the line stretched down the block. Social media influencers live-streamed as they tasted Maggie's reinvented comfort food, calling it soul on a plate. Local papers hailed it as a comeback story Dallas didn't know it needed. For Maggie, seeing two bustling locations under her name felt surreal. She had gone from diner waitress to respected chef owner, but success didn't silence her doubts. If anything, it amplified them. Late one night after the second location's launch, Maggie found herself scrubbing already clean counters at the original restaurant. Daniel walked in, rolling up his sleeves, noticing the tension in her shoulders. "You've been quiet lately," he said gently. She kept her eyes on the countertop. "Have you ever thought about what you lost because of me? Your family, your inheritance, Hayes Industries, all of it?" He leaned against the doorframe, brow furrowing. "Maggie, none of that was your fault. It was my choice." "You say that now," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But what about 5 years from now? 10? When this doesn't feel new anymore? When you remember the empire you gave up to peel potatoes in a restaurant kitchen?" Daniel took a step toward her. "You think I regret this? Don't you?" She shot back, tears in her eyes. "We're from different worlds, Daniel. Maybe we've just been pretending those worlds could stay together." He let out a short, incredulous laugh, not one of joy, but of disbelief. "So what, you think it's better to break my heart now before I can ever prove to you that I meant every choice I made?" She wiped her face, refusing to meet his eyes. "I think it's better than waiting for the day you wake up and hate me for ruining your life." Silence fell between them, heavy and unbearable. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He dropped to one knee right there on the kitchen floor. "Maggie Porter," he said firmly, "you are the most stubborn, impossible woman I've ever met. And that's exactly why I want to spend the rest of my life with you. No company, no inheritance, just us, cooking together, fighting, laughing, burning the occasional risotto. Will you marry me?" Her tears spilled freely now. "Daniel, you're crazy." "Completely," he said with a crooked smile. "Crazy about you." The kitchen fell silent, save for the hum of the fridge. Then, trembling, Maggie whispered the only answer her heart had left to give. "Yes." For a while it felt like a fairy tale. The engagement gave Porter's Flame an extra spark, and customers seemed to sense the joy simmering beneath every plate. Maggie wore her simple diamond ring while serving tables, and regulars teased her about being the queen of Dallas cuisine. But even in happy endings, shadows find a way to creep back. It happened on a night meant to impress. Maggie and Daniel hosted a private dinner for potential investors, small business owners who could help them expand Porter's Flame into something bigger. The tables were dressed with flickering candles, the air warm with the scent of rosemary and roasted garlic. Maggie served each course personally, weaving stories about her father's recipes into the evening. Daniel charmed the room, with his honesty sharing how he'd traded boardrooms for kitchens and never looked back. For a moment, Maggie let herself believe everything was finally secure. Then the front door swung open. In walked Margaret and Robert Hayes, Daniel's parents, flanked by a lawyer carrying a sleek leather briefcase. The room fell silent. Investors exchanged nervous glances. Maggie Porter. Margaret's voice rang out sharp as glass. We thought these people deserved to know the truth about who they're dealing with. The lawyer laid out documents and photographs, claiming Maggie had targeted Daniel, deliberately manipulating him into funding her restaurant. The accusations painted her as a schemer, someone who had orchestrated everything from the very first blind date. Maggie's stomach churned. "That's a lie," she protested, voice cracking. "I didn't even know who he was when we met." But the photos, carefully fabricated, told another story, one that made the investors shift uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. "Enough! You don't get to walk in here and destroy her with your lies." His father's tone was cold. "Open your eyes, son. She's using you." And just when it seemed the night was lost, the door opened again. Rachel marched in, her hair a mess, her face flushed with fury. "Oh, I think it's time someone told the real story." She pulled a flash drive from her pocket and waved it like a sword. "I've got videos. Proof of your investigator sabotaging Maggie's kitchen. Proof you tried to frame her. You want me to play them right here in front of everyone." The lawyer's face blanched. Margaret sputtered. Robert stiffened silent. Gasps rippled around the table. Rachel narrowed her eyes. "The truth is simple. Maggie and Daniel built something beautiful, and you couldn't stand losing control." The room erupted, not in scandal, but in applause. The investors stood with Maggie one by one, voicing support. Instead of crumbling, the attempted sabotage only made them look stronger. As Margaret and Robert retreated, the lawyer trailing behind them, Daniel slipped his arm around Maggie. She trembled, but his presence anchored her. "They'll never understand," she whispered. "They don't have to," Daniel said, his voice low but certain. "As long as we do." That night, Maggie realized something profound. The empire they were building wasn't about money or investors or even reputation. It was about trust, and trust was stronger than any legacy the Hayes name could hold over them. Months passed after the showdown with Daniel's parents. Porter's flame didn't just survive, it flourished. The second location thrived, and the original became something of a landmark. Diners didn't come only for the food anymore. They came for the story. For the waitress-turned-chef and the CEO who had given up an empire for love. On the 2-year anniversary of the restaurant, Maggie planned a grand reopening celebration after a long renovation. Golden string lights bathed the dining room in warmth. Tables were dressed with fresh flowers, and familiar faces filled the seats. Loyal customers, staff, who had become family, and new investors eager to celebrate. Daniel stood at Maggie's side, adjusting his tie nervously. "Are you sure you want to announce it tonight?" Maggie smoothed the front of her black dress, her engagement ring glinting under the lights. "Yes. Tonight, everyone who believed in us deserves to know we made it. Together." As dinner wound down, Daniel tapped a glass with his spoon. The room hushed. "Friends," he began, his voice steady, "thank you for believing in us when others didn't. Because of you, Porter's Flame became more than a restaurant. It became a family. And tonight, we want to share something even more personal." Maggie raised her hand, the rings sparkling. "We're getting married." The room erupted with cheers. Rachel whooped the loudest, standing on a chair. "I knew it, and just so you all know, this was my doing. If I hadn't bribed Maggie with $20 to ruin that date, these two wouldn't even be here." Laughter rolled through the room, the memory of that night now, a beloved part of their legend. But then the restaurant door creaked open. Everyone fell silent as Margaret and Robert Hayes stepped inside, hesitant and strangely subdued. Maggie's chest tightened. Not again, she thought. Not tonight. Robert cleared his throat, his voice quieter than she had ever heard. "Daniel, Maggie, we came to apologize." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Margaret stepped forward, her eyes glistening. "We tried to tear apart something we didn't understand. But we see now that what you've built isn't just a business. It's love. And it's stronger than anything we could ever destroy." Daniel froze, torn between anger and disbelief. But Maggie, seeing the vulnerability in their faces, placed a hand on his arm. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she whispered. The hugs that followed were hesitant but real. For the first time, the Hayes family stood not as enemies, but as people choosing forgiveness. The room erupted once more this time, with applause not just for love, but for reconciliation. Later that night, after the last guests left, Maggie emerged from the kitchen wearing a new apron embroidered in gold. Chef of his heart, Daniel pulled her close, grinning. "So, what's on the menu tonight?" She laughed softly. A future, seasoned with love adventure, and a little chaos. And as music played and they danced slowly in the quiet, Maggie realized the $20 bill that once felt like a joke had bought her something priceless. A love story that no empire could ever rival. And so, what began with a wrinkled $20 bill turned into a story no one could have scripted. Maggie, the sharp-tongued waitress with a fading houseplant and a battered recipe book, discovered that sometimes the smallest choices lead to the greatest transformations. Daniel, the polished CEO, who once lived under the shadow of his family's expectations, learned that true wealth isn't measured in shares or skyscrapers. It's found in laughter across a kitchen table, in sleepless nights chasing a dream, and in love that doesn't flinch when tested. Their journey was never easy. They faced sabotage lawsuits, betrayals, and doubts that threatened to tear them apart. But each trial refined them like fire, proving that when two people believe in each other, even the fiercest storms can become stepping stones. Porter's Flame became more than a restaurant. It became a symbol for resilience, for honesty, and for love that refuses to bow to fear. Every guest who walked through those doors felt it that the food was more than recipes. It was a story of courage served on a plate. And perhaps that's the quiet lesson hidden inside Maggie and Daniel's story. Life won't wait until we feel ready. Dreams don't arrive neatly packaged. Sometimes they're messy, chaotic, unpredictable. But when love stands beside you, laughing, stumbling, and carrying the weight when you can't, you realize that imperfection is exactly what makes the journey beautiful. So maybe the next time an opportunity comes wrapped in something small, something ordinary, a chance meeting, a helping hand, or even a crumpled bill, you'll remember this story. Because sometimes the smallest spark lights the brightest flame.